All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining our presentation today. Our session is called Exposing the GPT Manifest through LLMs to Make Data Discoverable. My name is Vecchionacce. I'm an analytics engineer at M1, and I'm here with my colleague, the wonderful Matt Kramer, a senior data engineer at M1. But before we dive in, let me just give you a summary of what we're trying to do at M1. So we have made our mission to help clients build and protect their wealth with automated tools and top-tier rates. We have built a comprehensive personal finance platform that empowers self-directed investors to do three key things. One is invest, the second is earn, and the third is borrow. And as you can imagine, supporting a platform this broad also means that we're working with a lot of data, as many as you guys are doing as well. And that brings us to today's agenda. So here's where we're going. First, we're going to talk about the problem that we face with data discovery, like the challenges that we had, what it is, of course, and the goals that we set to make data discoverable. Next, we're going to introduce you to Mystery Data, which is M1 AI-powered Slack bot that we built to bring it all together. And we're going to do a quick demo for you as well. Then, we're going to show you how we solved the problem by building Mystery Data. And we're going to try to leave a few minutes for questions at the end of our presentation. So let's jump back at the beginning, which is the problem. So data discovery at its core, it's all about helping people find, understand, and trust data assets so they can use them to answer questions, but also to make business decisions. And because it's all about discovering, understanding, and trusting data, we like to compare it to a GPS because you also, besides knowing the routes, you also need to know which ones are safe, fast, and reliable. But here's the thing. We knew that getting to that kind of clarity isn't always that simple as comparing data discovery to a GPS. I wish it was that easy, but let's be honest, it's not. So in our case, our challenges were our knowledge was very silo, the documentation wasn't always reliable, and answers were pretty slow to find. And that created a know-how bottleneck that resulted in endless data questions piling up and absolutely no self-service. In fact, here's a look at some of those questions that we would get on a daily basis, and I'm sure you're more than familiar with these questions on Slack threads, and who knows at what time, right? And we knew that at least in the case of M1, if we wanted to scale our data usage, this kind of friction was slowing us down, and that definitely had to change. That's why our North Star became this. If AI was going to help us at all, it had to have context. And in our case, was context on three things. First, context about dbt tables and views. Second was context about superset charts and dashboards. And third, context about SQL syntax. That's the kind of detail people need if they're going to trust an AI to guide them. And we knew that at least in the case of the dbt tables and views, the manifest already holded that context, and we just needed to find a way to unlock it. And that's pretty much the reason why we built Mystery Data. And again, it's just M1's AI-powered Slack bot that exposes the dbt manifest and makes data discovery seamless across our platform stack, which is Redshift, dbt, Superset, and Airflow. But it can also assist with SQL authoring, so stakeholders don't just find the data, but they can also use them confidently and quickly. So basically like the GPS that we were talking about, but for our data warehouse. And I'm just gonna stop introducing Mystery Data, I'm just gonna show you because it's demo time. All right, I'm gonna need some help with the video here. Thank you very much. So we've all been there. Like I said, someone pings you in the middle of the night, where can I find this data? Or which table is the source of truth? Or my personal favorite is, where can we find a dashboard for total AUM on the platform? And you're suddenly on a treasure hunt through DBT docs, Slack threads, Redshift tables, and maybe even old Confluence pages that have not been touched since 2020. So context lives everywhere, but most of the time, it feels like the answers live nowhere. And here's another truth. Not every single data person is an expert in every single data domain. That's the case of Matt and I, for example. So in the first demonstration, I'm going to ask, where can I find AUM data? I told you it was my favorite question, so let's do it here. All right, but first, Mr. Data needs some clarification because it's trying to identify my intention. What am I trying to do? Am I looking for an analysis on a very specific period of time, or maybe I'm looking for dashboards for more visuals, or do I need more raw data to build a custom analysis? And I'm going to pretend I have no clue, and I'm going to say whatever you have at the user level, including all products. All right, so Mr. Data steps in. It's providing me with the superset dashboard where it's defined, which is Enterprise Metrics Overview Weekly. It's giving me the link to that dashboard, and it's providing a brief description of how that dashboard can be helping me. But here's where it gets smarter, because it's also recognizing that there's a DBT model called Latest User Metrics with more product-specific AUM, like Invest AUM, Borrow AUM, Cash Accounts AUM. So it's giving me actually a link to that model and a brief description there as well. So instead of just stopping at the obvious answer, it's anticipating what I might need next. Honestly, I would have been just fine with the superset dashboard, but good thing that we also got the DBT model. All right, let's move on to the next case. All right, so in this case, I'm going to pretend that I'm a PM, and I'm going to ask Mr. Data if he can write a query for me of users who sign up in the last 30 days. So let's give it a minute, because we're engineers, not magicians, so I need some time. All right, so it's telling me that there are several models that could be helpful, but in this case, the most useful is latest users, because it has a column named acquisition data. And it's funny, because I never mentioned the word acquisition, so Mr. Data already knew that it might be related, and he was right. I'm also getting a link to the DBT catalog, again, where it's defined, a brief description of how that model could be helping me in the future, and it's providing me with a sample query and also giving me more columns than normally will be required when people are digging around acquisition data. That's the kind of stuff that we get all the time anyways. So here's something very interesting. It's recognizing that it's probably related to other models like latest users invest. So let's see what happens if we just go ahead and join it with that table instead. All right, here's the adaptive query. What we're doing in this case is just like switching to only the users who sign up for an M1 invest account in the last 30 days. It's also explaining the logic behind this query and what it's trying to do. And it's also giving me at the end something very interesting for non-SQL experts. And if I want to also see all of the acquisition data regardless of the product, but I want to flag an M1 invest account in those last 30 days to switch the inner join with the left join. So this is like SQL with training wheels. So for experts, it could be saving a lot of time, but for non-experts, it means that querying could be accessible for the first time, and no one needs to feel like they need to be initiated into some sort of secret data club. Now that I'm thinking about that, it would be a very weird ritual, but anyways. Now let's think back to all of those issues that we mentioned before, right? Like the silo knowledge, absolutely no self-service, documentation not always being reliable. Our knowledge base, powered by the DBT manifest and LLMs, it's attempting to solve all of that. And the best part of it is that it's for everyone. It doesn't matter if you're a PM, an analyst, an engineer, or even an executive. Mr. Data doesn't just surface the data for you. It also makes it discoverable, it makes it usable, and most importantly, it makes it approachable for everyone. So now I'm gonna hand it over to Matt so he can show you how we built Mr. Data.
All right. Thanks, Danny. One more time. OK, cool. Building Mr. Data. We'll start with a quick and high-level architectural overview. So M1's data platform starts with our warehouse, which is Redshift, not Snowflake, Redshift. This is our data warehouse. This is kind of the crux of everything. Layered on top of Redshift, we have Superset for our BI tooling, Airflow for orchestration, and dbt for our transformation layer. So these four kind of pillars are going to be the sources of the context that we want to provide our LLM in order for it to be effective. Also note here that this will be relevant for the rest of the conversation, but we're running the self-hosted version of all these two tools, so Superset as opposed to Preset, Airflow as opposed to Astronomer, and probably most notably Core for dbt as opposed to Cloud. All right, so we've got our four pillars. Starting with Superset, we layered on top some tools and a knowledge base. That knowledge base is going to be pulling from Superset's metadata backend. We'll be piping in information on dashboards and charts. This set of tools will give Mr. Data the ability to query for those charts and any visualizations that might be already created that we can point you to. For Airflow, we've got a kind of a set of tools leveraging the Python client. And these will do things like be able to query for your DAG runs, your task runs, and those logs on those tasks, giving the LLM the ability to assist in troubleshooting, summarize the log, suggest what might be a resolution going forward. And if you're not on the engineering side, as an end user, you could kind of ask Mr. Data, why is my report late? He might have some insight as to a specific pipeline that's down or delayed. And then lastly, but not leastly, we've got dbt and a tool for querying and a knowledge base as well. Here we're grabbing the manifest and piping that into the knowledge base, giving Mr. Data not only the ability to assist with SQL authoring because it knows our schemas, columns, and tables, so on and so forth, but also assist with data discovery because we've got all that metadata that was previously only accessible through the doc site. It can now be made accessible through Mr. Data. And then lastly, we wrap all this together in a pretty simple single node React-style agent. Currently, we're running Claude 4 on that agent. Our tech stack is the Lang chain, Lang graph, Lang fuse ecosystem. And then that agent is then exposed to Slack using the Slack Bolt API. And then I'll actually note that we don't have any direct integrations with Redshift today. Being a fintech, exposing actual data to Slack is regulatory nightmare, so we're just not doing it at this point. But we have everything we think we need to know for our initial use cases because dbt has all the information on what's actually in Redshift. Cool, so Mr. Data has all the context on all the key pillars of our data platform, which means that anyone in our business can use it for just about anything. Mr. Data is for anyone, whether you're an ad hoc user or a data practitioner. So whether you're utilizing Mr. Data because you got a friendly Slack ping from Airflow that your stuff's broken, and you just want to ask Mr. Data, what the heck, he can give you some answers and tell you what to do next. Or you don't know exactly how to write a query, but you don't want to wait for someone to help you fix it. You can ask Mr. Data, why isn't it working? And you can get some immediate feedback and get working again. Or you're gearing up to really do some in-depth analysis, and you don't know where to start, and you want to have a conversation with someone. Mr. Data can give you those answers and start that back and forth, making him kind of that GPS that Danny was mentioning earlier. I think this is one of the use cases that we're most excited about at M1 because this takes up the majority of a data team's time, and the ability to kind of offload this to Mr. Data can be really effective. Cool. So I want to talk about Mr. Data's prompt. Because if we just took all these tools and knowledge bases and hooked it up into some agent without thinking about what the prompt is, I could make actually a pretty good demo for you guys. But if you actually read that, what Mr. Data was saying to you, it would be pretty bad. He wouldn't tell you exactly the right things. It wouldn't be that tailored experience. He wouldn't feel like he's part of the data team at M1. So to do that, we started to distill our M1 culture and reflect on what it means to be a helpful assistant to our self-service users. And once we have some answers to what is the culture of data at M1, we can start to write that into Mr. Data's prompt. So we asked ourselves a few key questions, like how does our data team interact with self-service users? Where do we tend to direct those users to get those questions answered? And then what are the data points that are relevant for sharing beyond just a dashboard or a model name? So how do we interact with self-service users? I should turn this into an AMA next time. But so for our answer at M1, we have M1, our answer is that we have a kind demeanor, and we emphasize accuracy and correctness. I think we've heard all weekend about the importance of being able to trust your data. And we're working in this LLM world, which is infamous and notorious for hallucinating. So in order to try and get around this, we layer in reiterative language into our prompt, saying things like, you're an expert in this space, and you should never be showing a resource if you aren't confident that it solves the problem. This type of language is actually what makes Mr. Data, in our first demo, go back to the user and say, can you clarify your intention? I'm not quite sure what you mean. I don't know how to answer the exact question. So where do we tend to direct users to get their questions answered? So we all kind of have this hierarchy, right, of the most curated data we want to show first, and then if we can't get those answers, we have fallbacks. So starting with existing visualizations and dashboards and charts, then we want to fall back to something that's more curated and transformed in dbt. And if none of that has any answers, then we can kind of come back to some source data and work with that level of transformation. So to have Mr. Data understand this hierarchy, we have language like the dashboard knowledge base can help you identify any dashboards that are relevant for the user's inquiry. And if there are no relevant dashboards found, go and analyze the dbt knowledge base next. For our question of what data points are relevant for sharing, for us, we want to make sure that we always have a link. We always want to make sure there's a link to a dashboard or the doc site to accompany whatever Mr. Data is saying. We want to make sure that there's some easy to understand in English summarization of what you're about to see when you look at that artifact and how you should interact with it. Beyond that, we want to make sure people try and avoid any pitfalls with unwritten but understood difficulties within the data. We want to make sure that is surfaced and that people are using the data correctly. So for that, we have got language such as this. For each relevant artifact, make sure to include that link, include the key business logic that's been implemented, the important columns and their relations, and then try and guide the user on what they might do with this data going forward. And of course, lastly, I'll say that this prompt is constantly evolving. If you really press me on it, I don't know if any of that exact language is the same thing as it is today when I wrote this presentation, but the spirit and the gist is similar, and we're continuing to ask ourselves more questions and distill more of our culture into the prompt. Cool, so that's about Mr. Data's prompt. And now I want to start talking about our two knowledge bases for superset and dbt. We'll start with dbt, and as all things do, we'll start at the dbt repo. When we go to deploy our dbt repo to production, part of our CI is to upload the manifest to S3. When that S3 manifest lands on S3, it kicks off an Airflow job that has a few steps to accomplish. First one is we take a little delta. We only want the incoming and updated models. And then we also want to filter out a good portion of what's in the manifest, because we want to make sure we have a curated understanding of the specific models Mr. Data knows about. We don't just want to throw the world at him. We want to be concise. And then we also want to filter out a lot of the unnecessary tidbits. So the picture on the right is actually what we are loading today into our knowledge base. And I think a lot of these fields should be pretty intuitive. We've got the model names, descriptions, columns, all these good things. Everything should look pretty familiar except that last line. If you've worked directly with the manifest before, LLM description is not in the manifest. We add it as the next part of our pipeline. And this step is basically here to try and bridge the gap where we might have lackluster or completely missing documentation on a model. LLM's only going to be as good as what we provide it, and so we want to make sure it always has something to be looking at. So we're taking all the fields above it, sending that off to another LLM, telling it to put the, return a description. We pop that on this JSON blob, and then we load that JSON blob into OpenSearch. OpenSearch is a vector store and our implementation for a knowledge base. Superset knowledge base, this is going to be very similar, so I'll go through it a little quicker, but obviously not starting at the DBT repo. We're starting at the superset backend database. There we're exporting the metadata from that database on our charts and dashboards to S3. We're running this on a cron job once a day currently with Airflow, so not as event-based as DBT, but still effective. We're taking those exports, creating that daily delta to only get the new and updated artifacts, creating a JSON blob here like we have on the right for ingestion, where we have dashboards, and then nested inside of it is all the charts that comprise that dashboard. We're doing our LLM summarization to make sure we've got good metadata on the dashboard and each chart for the LLM to use. And then we load that into a second index in OpenSearch. And that's how we load our pipelines for our knowledge bases. So we've talked about the prompt, we've talked about the knowledge bases, we'll talk about now how we bring everything together, and we'll talk about Mr. Data's tool belt. So like I mentioned on the first slide, Superset and DBT, their tools are defined here just to go at those OpenSearch index we just talked about. So we've got two basic Python functions here. Get superset KB, search DBT knowledge base. Should have made those names conform. Anyway, they're basic Python functions, and everything is essentially the same except the index and the docstring. Docstring here is important because this is where we're telling our agent when to be using this docstring, what the input to that docstring is, and then of course what that tool is returning. So for superset, the when is when we're asking about dashboards, charts, visualizations. These type of keywords should always trigger the agent to go to our superset tool here. The input should be the query. We're letting the agent write the query here because it's going to use the context of the conversation when going at OpenSearch. And then in here it says you should always be returning a URL. So the agent knows it can be expecting a URL back when it calls this to be able to pipe that back to Slack and the end user. DBT knowledge base, very similar, except we've got kind of two use cases here for DBT. One is the SQL authoring, so we want to make sure the agent knows to call this when we're talking about docking SQL, writing SQL, assisting with errors in SQL. And then we've got the data discovery piece. So we write all that into the docstring here. And similarly, we've got the input of the query for OpenSearch and the return of the URL that should be given to the end user. Airflow, we've got a set of tools here. Leveraging the Airflow client, we're going to get DAG runs, we're going to get task instances, and we're going to get the logs. They're pretty basic here. We're actually only inputting things like the DAG ID and the execution date. There's a whole list of other parameters we could be passing as well. We'll get to adding all those in the future. But with this list of tools, the agent can really easily start from an input of what's wrong, why did my DAG fail for this date? It can spin on itself all the way down to the logs and give you that summarization that we saw a few slides ago. Cool, so that's everything from the prompt to the tools, the knowledge base, and how the knowledge base gets loaded. What's next? So much, but a few things here. But we do want to actually integrate with Redshift. We want to do things like test or query validation before giving it back to the end user, as for one, and continuing to build that trust and accuracy that we talked about earlier that Mr. Data has. Prompt refinement, as always. We've got to continue distilling our culture into the prompt. Really excited about using, making tags, telling Mr. Data about tags, continuing to tailor the response based on what people have to say about their experience using Mr. Data. And then lastly, if you didn't notice, a lot of this is home rolled. So I'm excited about using new features and MCP servers coming out from all these new open source projects. Yeah. So that's everything. I think we have a few minutes for questions.
We have 3 minutes.
If not, this is us.
Let's make a picture. No. I think you're getting a mic, yeah.
Are you doing anything to ensure that what the user returns, or what is returned to the user, they have access? So any sort of confirmation around, like, connected to your SSO or something?
That's a good question, and the answer is no. We're not. So today, we're actually very shy on going into the path of Mr. Data knowing about that really sensitive PII. So kind of kicking the can on that one, but Mr. Data actually doesn't really know about much that the majority of M1 doesn't have access to.
I think there's another question at the end. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. How are you assessing the performance of the bot and how much it's getting used as well?
Yeah, so we're pretty early on, but using deep eval as a way of doing evaluations on our prompt, and so we can iterate and test things like this. And then our monitoring tool is Langfuse, so we can check all the traces and kind of see what's happening. There's a lot of a human element to people telling us that they're having a bad experience, and then we're finding that trace in Langfuse, looking at the conversation, trying to reason about why Mr. Data did that, taking that back to our deep eval evaluation framework, and iterating like that.
Thanks.
Can you zoom into that LLM summarization? Was it like, for example, if your context is not enough sometimes, right? So you can get the different results and it might not be as good because as we know, AI is good enough as context sometimes. So where teams need to focus on enriching the context to an extent. Sometimes I don't put model descriptions and all those things. How does your LLM, is it like a continuous process you evolve? And engineering your prompts as well as your context side of the different things. You went to logs into Airflow and all those things. So what are the challenges that you guys see in general?
Do you want to Okay. So are you talking about in our, when we enrich our pipelines with LLM descriptions? Okay. Yeah, I would say that we've got a ways to go there. It's pretty basic of hey, here's all the things from the manifest, generate a description. You're right, that's not as good as if somebody who actually knew what was in the data wrote that description, which is why we don't override anything. It's, we still have human descriptions where relevant. And I think we're just trying to roll it out slowly, is probably my answer of, we're not just like throwing all our models through this and letting it generate whatever it will, because that wouldn't be super, super valuable. Only in some cases would it be. So doing it slowly, reviewing what the LLM is actually doing, and kind of tweaking it from there.
I think that's it. We only have 10 seconds left. Maybe one more question? Nope. All right, well, thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you.